That was great. Said a lot of that muted. Good morning. I'm Jill Barnett, the Lextran General Manager, and this is the May 19th meeting of the Board of Directors. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic state of emergency and Governor Beshear's executive orders regarding social distancing, this meeting is being held via live video teleconference pursuant to Senate 150, as signed by Governor Beshear on March 30th, 2020, and Attorney General Opinion 20-05, and in accordance with KRS 61.826, because it is not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. With that, I will turn it over to the chairman, Christian Motley, for a roll call and a call to order.
Thanks, Jill. Yes, we'll call this meeting to order, and I'll quickly call roll. If you just give me a shout or show your hand. Adrian? Harding?
Here. I'm here, Abe.
Amy?
Here.
George?
Present.
So tell me about our new is Dr. Capo. Oh, he's coming next meeting, I believe. Judge Thurston?
Present.
Judge?
Hello.
Do we have quorum? Move forward. First, I'd ask you if there is any public comment on agenda items. If not, we'll move to approval of the April minutes. Are there any questions or revisions? If not, we'll get a motion to approve.
This is Harding. I'll move to approve minutes.
George, second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? I have just a couple of notes for trade report. And as I mentioned, we do have 2 new board members. And apologize, let me know if there's an echo. But we got 2 new board members confirmed by council on May 6th. A quick welcome to Judge Lindsay Hughes Thurston, who's on with us today. And to Dr. Kofi Capo from BCTC. As I mentioned, Dr. Capo he'll join us in the June meeting. Judge, you want to say a quick hello or?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Lindsay Hughes Thurston. I'm a Fayette District Court judge. I am very excited to be a part of this board. Public transportation is so vital to the individuals we serve. So this conversation is always important to me. So I'm really excited to be a part of this and grateful for the opportunity and looking forward to getting to know all of you who I don't already know.
Thanks, Judge. Happy to have you aboard. A couple more notes. I think everybody here knew, but I'll just say here, Jill Barnett, she presented the budget that we all saw the last time we were together to City Council this week, and they all voted to accept that budget. There was no opposition, and that budget will move forward in that process. There is collective bargaining. The process is active and underway. If you have any questions, might direct those to Jill and the team. One additional point, City Council, they're returning to in-person meetings in August, which kind of brings to mind this board in our current format. If the board is interested, we can think about the next time that we need to return to in-person meetings. If we want to reflect the council or if we want to choose some other designated time, but it occurs to me that it may be time for us to think about when we want to begin meeting in person. Are there any thoughts on that? I'll just ask you in a moment.
This is Harding. I'm certainly interested in it. I don't know. I'd defer to Jill as to when the appropriate time to discuss that would be. But my vote is to see you all in person for the first time sooner rather than later.
Jill, do you know how long the governor's executive whatever decision is going to last as far as being able to do that on Zoom or on online?
I do not. I do not have an answer to that, Mr. Ward. I know in the past we, when the majority of the board was meeting in person, there were a few events where a board member needed to Zoom in, if you will, because of a physical absence. And in order to count towards quorum and to be a voting member, anyone not physically present must be able to see and be seen and hear and be heard. So I believe based on current statute, if a person needed to needed a remote option, that would still be available. But as far as when the governor's executive order will expire or if it will expire, I do not know that. I do know council is intending to return in August, and that seemed like an appropriate time for us, as well as that would be the month where we present the first month of data from the new fiscal year.
City council, though, they take summer off, don't they?
They do get a break.
They do have some recesses now and then, some parts in the summer.
So maybe we could, I don't know if we have to decide now, but maybe we give some thought to how we start the new fiscal year.
Okay. Would you like to continue this discussion at the next board meeting? How would you like me to proceed?
I cannot remember. Please go ahead.
Oh, I'm on a Medicaid Technical Advisory Committee, and they are leaving it to the committees whether they want to meet in person or not. I mean, so I assume this is okay with the governor, but they don't allow like an audience, visitors, to attend in person. They would have to attend online.
So as I was telling you, the building.
Yeah, let's, Jill, we'll continue. Let's bring it up at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Lastly, and Jill reminded me that we have to do nominations and elections for chair and vice chair in July, which means that we need to be able to take nominations at our next meeting in June. And I apologize because I got caught a little bit flat-footed because I don't think I haven't had a chance to talk to Adrian or really any other folks on the board about potential roles. Of course, I'm happy to continue to serve, but I'm also open to other folks having leadership roles as well. I think what I would like to do, and Jill, I know we went back and forth over email about this. I think that I would like to have us have a small nomination committee to consider folks, particularly if other folks are interested in serving in leadership roles. And so I would ask first, is there anybody who would be interested in serving on a nomination committee, which would be the role is simply to maybe consider folks who are interested in this role, maybe have some conversations, and prepare a nomination for the meeting when we are together in June. If not, I can appoint one offline.
I'm new here, Mr. Chair, but I'd be happy to help with that if you think I'm up to speed enough.
Judge, it would be my guess that this will be one of the easier committee duties.
Then I'm all in. But kidding aside, I'm happy to help.
I'm happy to serve on that as well.
Is that Jamie? Thank you. Any others before I move on? That'd be helpful. I just want to make sure we get to have a conversation about it. Thank you too, Judge and Judge Thurston and Jamie. And that is it for the chair's report. And we have a little bit of a light agenda. I think we can we jump right into the performance report?
We can, Mr. Chair. Before I turn it over to Mr. Combs for the presentation of the performance report, I did want to make a couple of comments. First, I would like to say welcome to 2 new Lextran employees. Noena Zerna has joined us recently as our marketing and communications coordinator, following the relocation of Austin Hughes, who formerly served in that role. And also a warm welcome to Tamara Higgins, who has joined us as our HR specialist over the last month. So happy to have those 2 folks on board and part of the team. I also wanted to share with the board, I'm sure I was excited last Friday, as I'm sure members of the board were as well, to hear the news from the CDC and from Governor Andy Beshear related to mask usage. I was very excited that we seem to be getting back towards normal. However, I will add that public transportation is still subject to a mask mandate as issued by the Transportation Security Administration. So for planes, trains, public transportation, masks are still required on board, and that goes for employees and members of the riding public. That is currently in effect until September 13th. And out of a spirit of unity with our operators and folks that are out there on the front lines, we are continuing our mask usage here in the administrative office as well. That remains in effect at least until September 13th or until we receive any new information. So I did want to share that with you, just in case you had any questions about that. And I believe that is all that I have before I turn this over to Mr. Combs.
Thank you very much, Jill. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, Judge Thurston. Glad to have you aboard. Happy to walk us through the April performance report and start us off with our mission statement. We serve people in our community with mobility solutions. So some highlights for April. Our General Manager, Joe Barnett, joined Attorney General Daniel Cameron and Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky to announce an educational campaign titled, "Are They Good for Your Kids?" You see in our picture that was from the press release that took place in Frankfurt. Very happy to participate with Attorney General Cameron on that effort. Lextran staff hosted the Federal Transit Administration in a virtual comprehensive review, and that is formerly known as the Triennial Review. I'm sure there'll be more information on that shortly. And then our partnering firm, the ETC Institute, completed the data collection phase of the onboard survey as part of our comprehensive operations analysis, and we will be sharing some of those findings with you in a future update of our COA. So there's some interesting things to talk about in April in terms of ridership. Our fixed route ridership in April looked pretty good. As you see, we've added that dash line. That was the red dot from last month. We've turned that into that gray dash line that shows our ridership in 2020, so we can see where we are compared to last year. And we've crossed over to April 21, was stronger than April 2020. That's to be expected as the recovery continues. And then the distance between our average, the gray line, and our green line is continuing to get a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. So that is the recovery of ridership in terms of fixed route. So I think in the fixed route since in April we did fairly well, but that is sort of pales in comparison to what happened on our paratransit side of the house. As you see, the gray line and the green line, they're getting pretty close. So that means we are more quickly or rapidly approaching where we would have thought we would have been before the pandemic. To sort of show those things in terms of our percent change, it looks like there's a bit of a divergence between fixed route and paratransit. And that's as we've talked about over the months, we expect paratransit to come back a little bit faster. It didn't take quite as strong of a hit as fixed route did. And this is sort of starting to play out now as the economy and other sectors start to reopen. So that is sort of our expectation moving forward, is that paratransit continues to recover a little more quickly than fixed route. We're going to have to see how things happen through the summer, and then once we get back into the fall semester on campus, I think that's going to be a good barometer of how fixed route will return. So those 3 slides feed into our system productivity chart. We topped 200,000 trips on fixed route. That puts us over 2 million for the fiscal year. Of course, that is behind where we would normally expect to be and where we were last fiscal year. Paratransit, again, catching up a little bit more quickly, but still 131,000 trips this fiscal year compared to about 180,000 last fiscal year. In terms of productivity, we are still slightly behind on the fixed route side, but as you see on the paratransit side, it's getting closer and closer to what we would normally expect. On the safety side of things, our preventable accidents on both fixed route and paratransit continue to be strong. This has been so far a strong fiscal year. I hope to see that continue. On the other metrics, we are tracking right along as we have the last few months. John and I had a quick conversation this morning. There's nothing specifically to talk about, just to say that we're still sort of in that realm of normal injury frequency rate and days with no preventable accidents. It's a tick high, but nothing to be alarmed about at this point. On the maintenance side of the house, we've been tracking the preventive maintenance inspections, so we're still perfect at 450 consecutive on-time preventive maintenance inspections. So it looks like we might be able to finish this fiscal year at a perfect 100%. Major kudos to our maintenance team for that. And then road calls for the month of April, we're up over 8,000 miles in between road calls. That's a very strong number. So I think hats off to our maintenance department for their good work in the month of April. Now, from the Finance Committee into the last board meeting, we've had a conversation of expanding our shelters throughout the system. And I'm coming back with some more information on our RAMP program and our standards, and I've got a small outline of what a project might look like. But first, to give you a little bit more background, our RAMP program, which is rider amenities at many places, we launched that in 2019 and has since improved 32 stops. That includes 6 shelters, some sidewalk connections, and a lot of that has been boarding pads. And boarding pads help with accessibility on typically the alighting portion of the trip, so that there is a safe space for someone with a wheelchair or another mobility device to get off the bus. So that's why there's not an amenity standard for a boarding pad. But we did take the advantage of the RAMP program to sort of help support those riders. Our current standards for transit amenities, and this is going to play, I think, an important role in how we choose to expand shelters, an average of 25 boardings a day for a shelter and an average of 15 boardings a day for a bench. That is where our standards are set in our Title VI plan. But we can also put out amenities, shelters, and benches with partnerships with nearby businesses. We have a few of those in the city as well. We talked a little bit about costs last month, and I think the number we said was about $15,000 per shelter. Put a range here between $12,000 and $18,000 per shelter, including site work and concrete. But anytime that design work is necessary, that $18,000, I mean, we can go well beyond $18,000 depending on the complexity of the site. But we think on average around $15,000 is about where that would land. For a bench, between $6,000 and $8,000. For a boarding pad, between $4,000 and $6,000. So with that information in mind, this is sort of the contours of what an expansion program might look like. I think the first thing that we would need to take into account is lower our ridership standard for a shelter. This is stretched out over the next 7 years. We would eventually get to about 6 boardings per day for a shelter. And I would we would think about that in a stepwise manner. The goal would be to install 14 to 15 shelters per year. And the funding I have on this chart assumes $15,000 per shelter for the next fiscal year, and then a 5% increase per year after that. So the approach here over the next year, and we sort of, Bruce talked about this number of 14. That's what we would target for next year. I think that is a slightly ambitious goal, but something that we can shoot for and hopefully attain per year with the capacities that we have in-house. And that would include pulling permits, working through easements, doing the simple sort of design work that we can do in-house, and then also through our partners if we need to do extensive design work. So the first thing, we would drop our standard from 25 to 15 for the next 2 fiscal years. We could then, as we move, of course, there's going to be touch points for the board throughout this should this be the way that we go, and kind of see where we stand. And what that would do is open up enough possible stops that we could maybe get 28 shelters over the next 2 years. Once we cross that threshold, then we can drop our standard again. I've got it noted here to about 10 boardings a day, which would give us enough target stops that we could, maybe do another 28 shelters. And then after that, have to drop the standard again to about 6. And that would sort of keep things, we would focus on the stops that are used the most and keep it in a stepwise manner that hopefully we can reach our target of 100.
Fred, do you have any data on boardings after shelters are installed, if it stays the same?
We don't have good data on that because a lot of the shelters that we put in over the past 2 years, we have now a mix of pandemic data versus non-pandemic data. And I've thought about ways that maybe I could model that to see what increase that you would get from a shelter. I did a cursory look for an industry standard. I certainly can dig deeper and see if we can find something that we could use to give a touch point of how effective that this project or this program would be.
And Fred, the only other question of fiscal year 26, the reason we dropped to 6 boardings is because after you get to so many shelters, there aren't any more eligible that will meet that 10 boardings per day.
That's correct. At this point with 25, I think there's 17 stops in the system that have 25 boardings per day that don't have a shelter. And the majority of those have some sort of barrier or reason that we can't put a shelter on. One of them I can think of is on Main Street. There's just not enough room to put a shelter there. So what we have to do is expand the scope to have enough possible shelters to put, to target. And that's as we lower the standard, more and more shelters become available to us or eligible for an amenity. And something else we'll have to do with this is mirror the standard for shelters and benches, and then probably say in our Title VI plan, if a shelter is not possible or feasible in a location, then we would evaluate it for a bench. If that is not possible or feasible, I think that's all we can do. But we would at least be able to put some sort of amenity in more places.
And then I'm assuming the federal funds get lower because we've lowered our standards. They're not willing to match at as high because the boarding per day isn't as high.
That is based on traditional budgeting. I think Nikki and Jill can probably touch on that better than I can, but that's where we've been traditionally, and that's where we would. That's our starting point.
The 75,000.
Yes, it was 75,000. We recently bumped that up before we pushed the budget out to 150.
Yes, this is Nikki. That's correct. We in our capital plan, Fred's going by what numbers are in our capital plan, and we had 75, and those are just placeholders. We could always increase those a little bit depending on what our needs are during that time period. But anything additional would be made up with local funds.
And this is Jill. I would like to circle back a little bit to Georgia's question about possible increases in boardings at locations where we put a shelter. And as Fred stated, there aren't a lot of good models for that that we've been able to find right now. However, one thing that we do know based on some industry data that is available is that a person's perceived wait time is much lower when they are at a bus stop with an amenity like a shelter. If they have cover, their perceived wait time for the bus, it is lowered. So that is something that may have some impact on customer satisfaction, in addition to the fact that the shelter's there in the first place.
And sorry,
Can I ask?
yep, go Christian.
No, Jamie, go ahead.
One last question. Any concern of going that low to 6 boardings per day? Are we now getting into, there's 200 eligible?
Yes, there's some concern. You know, so bus routes sometimes have to move. We have to be very careful of where we put this infrastructure to make sure that it's in a place that we're going to stay. I mean, if should a roadway design change or a development change, we need to be able to change with it. Once you get into those areas with lower ridership, there's an increased risk there. And then it's just the sheer number. I mean, you know, we'll have to go from maintaining 100 to maintaining 200. There's extra cost involved in that that's not reflected here. I mean, there might be, we've talked about the idea, do we need a smaller garbage truck to, I mean, things that we've explored a little bit, we've not really fleshed out those ideas yet, but yeah, I mean, that is a concern going that low.
There's also a little bit of the concern about how sustainable that is, moving beyond what you see here on paper, that you know that people continue to ask for shelters at a location where there are only 5 or 6 boardings per day, and what's this long-term sustainability of that. I have another comment, but I think I heard a question from a board member, so I will pause and let that person ask their question.
Fred, are these target shelters, are they in locations where there's no bench or no pad or anything right now?
Some of these would already have a bench, and then those would be the easiest ones to look at. Most of especially later on the smaller ridership ones, they wouldn't have anything at the moment. But there's a mix of some do and some don't.
Okay, so let's say these first 14, do they have benches at the moment?
Some of them would, not all of them. I would say, let me see.
I would imagine that if you put up a shelter where there's already a bench, it's less costly. Would that be correct?
It depends on the size of the pad. Sometimes we would have to remove the bench and still make a pad extension to make sure that there's enough room to put the shelter, because shelters are generally larger than the benches.
So it wouldn't save any money?
It could save some, depending on the condition of the pad and how much of an extension of the pad would be needed.
Okay. Okay, so that's not factored in here, correct?
It is not.
All right. And there's quite a few of these that have benches or pads already.
Correct.
I'd also throw out there, Rick, that a lot of the new shelter designs have benches integrated into them, so we might be able to redeploy some of those benches to other underserved stops once a shelter's put in place.
Correct.
That's right. I'm just saying if the pad's already in place, it's probably not going to cost as much to put a shelter over it. What's magic about 14? Can you not do more than 14 a year?
That is, you know, we did 6 in the past 2 years. Pushing that up to 14, I think that's a goal that's ambitious, just with the amount of staff that we have.
I mean, you put them out for bid. I mean, why not
a lot of
30?
It's you have to consider permitting, you know, easements, dealing with easements, agreements. Those things just take time to work through.
We did discuss here that, you know, this seems like a long time frame, and I would love to do this faster. And so we have had some discussions about how we can do this faster. So know that it is not our goal to drag this out for years and years. We would like to do this faster and are exploring ways that we can do that.
It seems to me 14 is long. I mean, you know, you got these, especially for these first two where you have 15 boardings a day. I mean, let's get something going there. And well, yeah, we can stretch it out if we want to do the permitting in 2 batches, but why not do all 30 at the same time, get all the permits done, and then move forward? If we had a goal of 30 in a year and a half, I think we would make it. If we have that goal, if we have that intent.
Rick, let me just say, as somebody who's permitted a lot of buildings and work through the city and the state, that neither entity is likely to grant blanket permits for multiple sites. That's just not how they work. Now, I think Jill and Fred, I think that's a worthwhile discussion to have with both the Transportation Cabinet and Streets and Roads, if they'd be willing to create a sort of fast track for us. And I'd be happy to lend my experience to any of those discussions if y'all want to call me in.
Yeah,
I know a lot of those people.
Thank you.
and I'm not necessarily saying that there'll be a blanket permit, but if you start all 30 at the same time, the permit process on 30 at the same time.
Well, if you want to get the design work done for 30 at a time, it's going to take you 10 months just to do that. So there's a functional limit to how fast these things can get done.
Okay.
Speaking of design work, I did have a question, Fred. You mentioned that we do a lot of this in-house. I know that there are other transit authorities that partner with engineering firms in a sort of as needed basis on a fixed length contract. Do we have any of those kind of agreements in place for this kind of work?
Yes, we do. That is part of our architecture and engineering on-call contract with Kersey and Kersey.
Got it. Thank you.
And
I had
that
one
firm
dumb
is
question.
currently,
Sorry.
sorry, that
Go ahead, Jill.
the firm Fred is referring to, Kersey, they are currently doing work for us on our downtown transit center, and they are also working on our canopy project too. So we are using their resources at the present time.
How much local money went into the canopy project?
Did you say how much local money went into it?
Yeah, going into the canopy. Or some?
Some will. There is a significant federal LONO grant that will help that project, but the design work has not been completed to know the size or overall budget for what we're going to do. So I can't answer the amount of local money that will ultimately go to it just quite yet.
You can't estimate it?
I don't know how large we're going to go.
Oh, I thought I saw a budget. You have 1.7 million in the capital budget.
It's based on it's based on the grant that we received. That's the number that you saw on paper. That would, if we stayed to whatever size you can do with that amount of money, that of course would be what we do.
Was that combined federal and local, that 1.7?
This is Nikki. The actual grant is 2.2 million, and that was our final project that had toll credits with it. So we would have almost 2.3 federal funds, and then anything above and beyond that would be local. But we did get a toll credit match for that.
We do have toll credits on that, Nikki?
Yes.
Okay.
Harding, I thought you were gonna do one more.
Oh yeah, I just had a two dumb questions. One, what is the Title VI plan? That's just not a phrase that I'd heard before. And for the benefit of our new member Thurston, how many total stops and how many total shelters do we currently have, so that she understands sort of what kind of undertaking we're discussing?
So the Title VI plan is our is an environmental justice plan. It would consider things like language access to make sure that our routes are serving minority and low-income populations. There's service standards included, service monitoring included, and we update that every 3 years. So should we reduce our service standard, we would bring that back to the board and have that formally reduced from 25 to 15. I'm happy to share that plan. It's on our website. I can shoot it out an email after we're done, give you more information about it. In the system, we have close to 900 stops and roughly, I think the last number was about 102 shelters. Mike, correct me if I'm wrong. It's somewhere around 100 shelters.
I think the number I presented yesterday was either 104 or 105, but that is what we presently have. And as Mr. Combs said, close to 900 stops throughout the system.
So let me make sure that I'm not making a false assumption here that if we've got about 100 stops, or 100 shelters on 900 stops, we're looking at doubling that to 200 shelters. And in so doing, we have to lower the number of boardings per day to qualify. Am I right in then assuming that the vast majority of the stops within the system do not meet the 6 boardings per day threshold?
That is correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
And some of that is a little bit because some of the stops are more driven by lightings, and that we're only looking at boardings here. So you might have a stop on one side of the street that has 15 boardings and 2 lightings, and then the stop on the other side of the street would be the reverse of that. So you're getting on at one stop on one side of the street, getting off at the other stop at the other side of the street.
That's good to understand. Thank you, Fred. So that more about origins and destinations. That's great. Well, I want to thank you and the team for putting this together. I know it's something that always brings out the emotions and the it's something we're all interested in, because I think it's a real tangible example of the service that we're bringing to our community. And I want to say, with regards to whether having a shelter increases service at that shelter, I would assume, and I may be wrong about this, but it seems right, that a shelter is an opportunity for us to essentially advertise Lextran. And
Yes.
that while there may not be a marked increase in service at that stop that receives a shelter, I think just the perception that Lextran is expanding, that Lextran is available, is going to perhaps lead to, or I would hope would lead to, increased ridership across the system, just because people are thinking about it. I know that from spending time in San Francisco, there's such that bus stop is such a distinct part of the urban fabric. You can't not think about Muni, and so it brings that opportunity to use that service to top of mind. So that's all I'd say, and thank you all for putting these numbers together. I think I'm pleased to see that it feels like a manageable dollar figure stretched over this number of years, and I would hope that we could even do more. So
Thank you for those comments, Harding. I do feel like this is manageable, and if we are able to expedite the process, I would certainly like to do so. And with regard to your comments about advertising Lextran and hopefully increasing the service, and another thing that I take into consideration, and I think that I think you may have heard me say this, and I know staff has heard me say this, but I don't know that I've ever said it to the full board. One thing that I really want to do as part of our overall service to the community is offer people a dignified experience. And I think waiting at a covered shelter with a safe boarding pad for them to get on or off, that helps do that. That changes the perception of a person waiting on the side of the road in grass at a light pole with a bus stop sign on it. Whether a person has a choice to ride transit or not, that they're still people and they still deserve a dignified experience. And so that's part of my goal with this project as well.
Jill and Fred, can I ask just 2 more quick questions on this? Fred, I think you may have talked about this before, but I know I want to know, aside from I know that we're using the boardings per day as a standard for prioritization, but I want to know if there's additional factors as we consider. I'm really thinking about sort of the equitable expansion of this. And so are there other factors that we're considering in the prioritization of the stops on the front end?
Absolutely. And we will look at that geographically across council districts. I've got maps here on my wall of minority populations and low income populations that we try to make sure we have an equitable distribution. we look at the physical characteristics to make sure that it, you know, it's feasible to be done in the first place. So we cut this as many different ways as we can possibly cut this to make sure that we have as equitable a distribution across the city as we can get.
And I'm wondering, you know, we've talked about the what do we call our equity goal, the disadvantaged businesses and minority businesses. The goals that we set. Would these projects be an example of those that could be, I mean, that would help us work toward that goal?
Absolutely. And the contractor that had worked on ramp up until now was a DBE. That contract is up and is going to be on the street within the next little bit. And next week we are doing a doing business with Lextran and DBE meeting with. I've invited every DBE that's on the Kentucky registry, so we'll be talking more about that a little bit later. But yes, and this is one of the things that we want to share in the How to Do Business with Lextran meeting. This is an opportunity that's available. Absolutely be aware of it, and you know, jump on that bid.
Can you share that information with me?
Absolutely.
I have, so when we put out the RFP, for example, is it like 14 stops? Is that one contract?
This RFP has, I don't remember the number of stops off the top of my head, but there's that component of it, the stops that we already know that we're going to do. There's also some more boarding pads along with it, so it's more than 14, as well as an hourly rate to do the stops that we don't have permitted and ready. So this one contract should satisfy both of those.
I share the sentiments that Harding shared, and I mean, there's a reason that this is getting a lot of conversation. It's really important, and I appreciate you all laying this out.
I will also quickly add, and then I will let Mr. Combs move on. We discussed previously the budget presentation at council yesterday. Of the questions asked by council members after the presentation was over, there were questions related to shelters and bus stops. So this is something that the community and the council is also looking at.
If there is no further questions of me, I will turn it over to Ms. Falconberry in financials.
I see. Oh,
Actually,
sure.
I just have a quick one. I do echo the sentiments of Mr. Harding and Mr. Motley, but I would like to ask about the budgeting and factoring in the cost of maintenance and what the anticipated cost to truly maintain these, you know, in terms of everything from landscaping to cleanliness to structural maintenance, of course. And is there opportunity to have sponsorships or community collaborations to assist with the maintenance over time to make sure that it's sustainable?
Thank you for that feedback, Adrienne.
Yeah, and I don't know that we have really plotted out the additional cost beyond just the construction at this moment. That's something that we've had some initial conversations about. We don't quite have that packaged up yet. And we do see in other systems collaborations and partnerships that do help. So we can certainly take that feedback and run with it. Well, thank you, everyone. If there's nothing else, I'll turn it over to Nikki.
Thank you, Fred. If someone could change to the next page, please. Okay, this is our balance sheet for April of 2021. It's hard to believe we're already 10 months through the fiscal year. I don't know about you, but I've lost all concept of time since 2020, so it's hard to believe that we're almost at the end. We have operating cash at the end of April was right at 18 million, which as you'll see was a little higher than last year. We have our assets are just a little bit more, obviously due to cash, and we have recently bought new buses, so you will see that reflected in the May report. If there aren't any questions about the balance sheet, I will go on to the revenue versus expenses.
Nikki, there is still another grant we've yet to receive, right? A large one from the federal government.
That is correct. That grant is $14 million and it's on a reimbursable basis, and that will be stretched over the next 2 fiscal years. Okay, if you'll go to the next page, please. Okay, this is our revenue versus expenses. Our property taxes are looking really good right now. We're about 160,000 over where we were this time last year. Our passenger revenue, of course, is still under budget, but as Fred said, we're keeping a close eye on ridership. You'll see some of our federal funds reflected there that are from the CARES grant. Our wages are a little bit over budget. That was due to a little bit of overtime, and March had 3 payrolls, so that should even itself out a little bit. We are still under budget in about everything except materials and supplies, which we've mentioned before would be our bus parts and our things for the facility that we need to replace. Everything else is looking very good. We're closely watching paratransit expenses, and but everything else is under budget, and we're very pleased at this time. So I'll be glad to answer any questions.
I just wanted to point out on that passenger revenue, what we did in the last month was almost 78,000. So that annualized is 936,000. So it is getting closer to, what our normal passenger revenue would be for a year.
It is. We're very very pleased that we've seen a small increase in that over the next few months. So we're hoping when some of the people get out and kind of get back to normal this summer and fall, that we'll see some increased ridership there.
Yeah, I was going to make this comment, but I didn't really have a break to do it when Fred was showing the ridership graph. Those lines are going to cross because we'll be comparing, to a COVID year here pretty soon. Right. And we may want to think about, putting fiscal year 19 up as something that we at least understand where we are versus what a normal year would be once we start this new fiscal year. But both for financials and for ridership.
Right. It's hard to compare anything to 2020. So I wanted to say thank you to Jill for presenting the budget to City Council yesterday. She did a fantastic job, and so we're very pleased to get that passed through the city, and then we will be submitting that to the state very soon. So if there are no questions, thank you all and have a good day.
Thank you, Nikki.
And that closes the performance report. We don't have any action items today. Any change orders, old business?
We do not have any change orders or old business to report.
And on new business?
We do have a new business item that I wanted to bring before the board for informational purposes. And Mr. Combs, if you would pull that up, I would appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to request control. All right, so last Thursday, May 13th, Ann Tyler Morgan, our attorney, helped facilitate a meeting with representatives from Stolking and Ogden, Commonwealth Economics, and the developer Estanza about a proposed development known as Spiegel Heights. They shared some slides with me and said that it was okay to provide those to you and share those with you today. So I have that here to run through. But before I do that, I wanted to let you know our discussion centered around their industrial revenue bond proposal that is before City Council. And that will go before City Council again on May 25th. Industrial revenue bonds are a funding mechanism used to support development projects in urban and downtown areas, and effectively takes a property off the tax roll for the life of the bond. So to give you an idea of where this is, it's inside Lexington's Distillery District, and it's very walkable to the new convention center, Rupp Arena, various distilleries and breweries that are in the Distillery District, and it is located along the Town Branch Trail. As you know, much of the Distillery District revitalization is intended to rehabilitate that area that's been very run down. This project would also help bridge a geographical gap between a currently developed and revitalized west end of the Distillery District and the east end located near the new Central Bank Center. So this is just a map to give you some idea of where the project's proposed location is on that star in the area. This shows you the currently revitalized West End with Pepper Distillery, the Burl, Elkhorn Tavern, and Barrel House, which, as you know, is a very, very popular events venue. And this is the unimproved West End, which is the proposed area for their project. So the new project's development is intended to bring in 125 hotel rooms, a full-service restaurant and rooftop bar, spa, entertainment and events venue, and additional commercial uses. Fills some of the unavailable guest room supply needs for Visit Lex and Central Bank Center right now. Expands the public right-of-way, has new parking, improved pedestrian features like crosswalk safety and traffic calming measures, improved landscaping, and just visual improvements in that corridor. And as I said before, the industrial revenue bonds are a funding mechanism for these urban and development projects in the downtowns. And what it would do is take this property off the tax roll for the life of the bond, which is proposed at 40 years. In lieu of those tax payments, they would structure what's known as a pilot agreement with LFUCG. And within that agreement, they would outline payments to Lextran, Fayette County Public Schools, and the Lexington Public Library for the life of the project. So while we wouldn't be receiving tax revenue from them, so we'd be foregoing any new tax revenue based on improvements and an improved assessment to the property, we would receive funding based on the current value of the project, along with they added a CPI inflator, roughly estimated at about 2%. And so you can see the number here that we would continue to receive for this. You see lots of community benefits. It's the addition of jobs, additional economic impact, expanding the hotel rooms available, transient room tax revenues. So a lot of economic investment in that area that does not currently have it. I'm going to circle back, so sorry about that. So as I understood it, this project has received a favorable look from the Mayor's Economic Development Group, and will be going before City Council on the 25th. And they shared this information with us, for informational purposes, one, and also to help get Lextran's support of their project. So there's no action for you to take today, but I did want to share this with you since this information was brought to me last week. And I would hope to be able to answer any questions that you might have, but I won't promise that I can. However, I do know who to ask if we have that question. And I believe George has a connection to one of the gentlemen that is working on the project from the developer. They both attended Cornell, and he also knows someone at the economic firm that I think he might have a little bit of information and help answer any questions too. I'm volunteering you, George, so sorry about that.
I'm happy to help if anybody has any questions. One piece of information is when the current owner bought the property, it doubled the valuation from the PVA. So theoretically, we've already gotten a bump from it.
Yes.
And so, it's a good project for the city. Absolutely.
Jill and Fred may have these numbers. What's our ridership look like on Manchester? Although I'm assuming this would be more ridership that's geared toward taking people from the hotel to the convention center, theoretically in the future. What's our ridership look like now?
Over the last year, I would say it has not looked very good because that route has been suspended. Fred can maybe give you a historical perspective, but I will add that traditionally that area has not been very, very high in terms of ridership. The area along Manchester in the Distillery District area is one that is starting to receive or to see more of a daytime boom with the restaurants there, but since inception has been geared more towards nightlife, if you will. So that has not coincided with the bus route. At the opposite end, you have the detention center, which we're happy and glad to serve to give those folks an option if there are people that are going there for visitation purposes or people who might be released at the completion of their term and need a way to get around. But historically, that has not been a boom in terms of ridership. Fred, do you have anything to add with that?
That mostly covers it. That route has traditionally been the least productive route in our system. And it is, Jill touched on it a little bit, but there's been a bit of a mismatch in schedules where our intent is more of the jail serving that. And much of the activity that's happened down there traditionally, and that's starting to see a little bit of a shift in that, has been more of the late night crowd. So, weekend, late night, we don't really have service there and never have had service there. So there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of schedules. And that route has not traditionally been very strong.
Craig Hask, I'm just looking at our route map right now, and Route 24 would seem to be what serves nearby this area, but does not actually run down Manchester Street.
That's correct.
What's shown on the website right now a COVID adjusted layout. So there, in normal times, we'll say there would be a route that would run all the way the length of Manchester Street, or not?
It would not run the length of Manchester Street. It would cut across from Forbes.
Okay. So for those who aren't looking at it, it starts basically at the Red Mile and runs all the way out to the jail and then comes back.
All right. Well, as I said, I wanted to share for the purposes of information with the board. But if there are no other questions, we can move on in the agenda.
Thanks,
Actually, Jill.
Oh, yes.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I can.
So then the benefit or relevance for Lextran then right now is just that the kind of deferment or adjustment in the source of revenue that we would have gotten from tax funds that we'll get from the pilot payments, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so then is there any conversation about or relation to the small bit of residential area that is still there? I know a lot of the residential area there has been relocated, for lack of a better term, but there is a small little inset of residential area there on the east end. Do we have any ideas or statistics about serving that population and whether or not this creates more isolation for them from our service or any other city services, especially as a historically BIPOC area I just think it's interesting to think about that sort of access.
We did not get that far in on the internal side in our discussion. Are you referring to Davis Bottoms area?
Yes, the Davis Bottom area, you know, there's the new houses that were built, but then kind of directly behind, across from the music venue and
Yes.
Barrel
Okay.
House, there's a small apartment or townhouse complex there.
Yes.
I was thinking that's specifically what came to mind right away. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Located sort of up that small hill.
Yes.
I think, yes. Okay. No, we have not had much discussion on that area.
I will add, there's a neighborhood back on Thompson Road that
Yes.
we do serve, but it's from on Route 12 on Leestown Road. So it would walk up
Right.
to there's I think it's called Clyde Street. That's where that service for that neighborhood would be, not on the Manchester Street side.
Right. And so then is the service for Davis Bottom, is there Manchester Street service, or do they walk up to Versailles?
They would walk up to either Versailles or walk across to Broadway.
Okay. Broadway?
If you were walking the length of Oliver Lewis, the closest would be Versailles.
Okay. All right. Sure. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, board, for that item on new business. Going back to the agenda, and we have a number of proposed agenda items that I wanted to get in front of you to let you know about in June. We will have an update, a presentation on the comprehensive operations analysis that has been underway. We have a handful of resolutions related to a procurement policy update that was recommended from our FTA comprehensive review in that triennial process. We will have the fiscal year 2022 meeting schedule that will be adopted by resolution. A resolution for pension fund management, and a resolution for hybrid battery replacement services. We will also have the board officer nominations, as we spoke about earlier when Mr. Motley was giving his chair's report, followed by board officer elections in July. So did want to bring those things before you, also subject to other items that may come up between now and then, and would discuss those with the chair and vice chair.
Thanks, Jill. I do believe that we need to have a closed session today.
All right. I would move that we enter into closed session pursuant to KRS 61.810 subsection 1C and E for the purpose of discussing pending litigation against the agency, as well as collective bargaining negotiations between public employer and its employees.
There's a second.
This is Harding. I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? That motion carries. We'll go into closed session. Could the general manager, assistant general manager, and HR coordinator stay on the line? We'll ask everyone else to step away.
Stand by for just one moment, please.
We also have some legal representatives, Mr. Motley and Mr. Combs, that need to stay. That would be Mr. Donald Wakefield is present, and of course, Ms. Ann Tyler Morgan.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, we are ready.
All right. So this is where I would state that we have returned from closed session, and during that session, pursuant to KRS 61.810 subsections 1C and E, We discussed pending litigation against the agency as well as collective bargaining negotiations between public employer and its employees, and no action was taken during the closed session.
Thank you. Thank you, Adrian. And I, correct if wrong, I do not believe we need to take additional action. If so, if there is a motion for adjournment, entertain that.
We do not have a majority quorum, so I think we will adjourn by consensus.
Consensus, yeah.
As well. Thank you, Jill and team, for a good meeting. Thank you, board members, for hanging out for a while.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I have a lot to learn.
You'll get it. Bye.